Thank you for tuning in to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Whether you're listening during your commute, while working out, or just relaxing at home, we appreciate you. Every download, every listen, and every subscription means a lot. Up next, the 12 Kyle podcast.
So once everybody crossed the street, there was this big circle and Rocky and Mandy started throwing haymakers at each other, not connecting at all. Not connecting at all. And so I think Rocky got one in, and then Mandy hit her with a two-piece, boom, boom, like that. And then, of course, devilish, horny little boys like myself in 8th grade, you know why we're here. We're waiting for the bras to pop. Waiting for the bras to pop. And suddenly, Mandy's bra popped off. And boy, we caught a sight because she was way more developed in the 8th grade than, any of the other girls were. So it was a sight to see. We only caught a glimpse, but we caught enough of a glimpse. And to this day, I can't tell you who won, but that's just some of the shenanigans we had the last day of school, fighting. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I am your boy, 12 Kyle. I want to thank you all for tuning in as you do each and every week. Shout out to those of you who are watching on YouTube. Man, check this out. On this episode, what I want to talk about is the last day of school. Now, at the time of this recording, by the time that you hear this, the date that this episode is released, it will be the last day of school in my household. What I mean by that is our daughter, she will be completing her freshman year in high school. And when I tell you that this year has gone by extremely fast, it's almost like we blinked and the year was over. And what it got me to thinking about was with it being her last day of school, just like what the year was, and then also like kind of reflecting on the last day of school for me. Now, first, like, as I mentioned, she finishes her freshman year today. And I'll be honest, not only was it a blur, but it kind of got off to a rocky start. And what I mean by that is not so much as academically, because I don't think she got any, she's had all A's, right? So getting all A's is cool. I mean, it's great, better than me, right? But, socially, it was something different for her because you go from being in middle school to high school, and you're at this high school, and she's at the same high school where her brothers went to school. And, what made it even more dynamic in our household is that, our youngest son, her older brother, Brandon, he was off in college. And so now he's in college. Her other brothers are away. And, it's just her. And it's like for the first time, we only have one child in school, which, I don't even remember the last time it happened. As many of you know, we had 3 boys and our daughter, Skylar. Our boys are ages 26. Dion is 26 at the time of this recording. Cameron is 23 at the time of this recording. And Brandon is 19 at the time of this recording. And Skylar is 14. And so this was something new to just have one child in school. And, she's starting high school and, you only know a handful of people. And while she's familiar with the school, it was just different. So, there was some trepidation on my part, just nervousness. And, I wasn't sure if she liked the school, even though, it's where she goes to school and everything. But it took a minute, for her to find her, her crew and everything like that. And she settled in. And like I said, work-wise wasn't a problem. Socially was where it was. But, coming off of that, going into that, it's amazing that we've reached the last day of school. But what's interesting is like making me think about my last days of school. So I wanted to reflect back a little bit. I don't know about y'all, but like one of my most fondest memories of the last day of school were the fights. Every year, probably from the time I was in the 5th grade, at least through middle school. And for me, middle school was 7th and 8th grade. We didn't have 6th, 7th, and 8th like most of you did. but yeah, middle school, there was, in elementary school, there was always fights. And the reason being is because I think there's a segment of kids who, they want to fight, or they dislike this person and they've been holding it in all year long. And the last day of school, it's like, I'm going to get my payback. If you push me in the lunch line that day in February, I held on until the end of May, and we're going to squabble. And so I'm amazed at how people held grudges that long, or held the pent up frustration that long, to want to fight. But every year, without fail, fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade. I don't recall any fights in high school, but there were definitely fights in middle school and elementary school. And people just they wanted their get back, and I get it, to some degree. But again, if something happened, I mean, like, what you? If something happened to you in January, I mean, why are you fighting in May? Like, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. But hey, um, I do remember one of the most vivid fights I remember, and I'm not gonna call her name because she may or may not see this episode. Um, but we had just finished eighth grade, and um, let's call her Mandy. 'Cause I didn't go to school with any Mandy. So Mandy had a she had a beef with a girl named Rocky, and it was over a boy, of course. And so we're all in the eighth grade. So, I would ride the bus home. But, because I knew there was gonna be fights that particular day, um, I said, you know what, I'm gonna walk home. And it wasn't a long walk, but it was long enough, okay, from my middle school. And so what I decided to do was, me and some of the homies, we were like, okay, well, hey, we know it's going to be we know that Mandy and Rocky are going to be fighting after school. And we knew of a couple of more, maybe two or three more fights. So it was going to be some fights. And so the thing was that on the last day of school, people strategically made sure that they did not fight on school grounds, because that's the only way that you couldn't get suspended. Um, which I thought was dumb, but I mean, technically, I guess they had to follow the rules. But the rules were, if you were caught, because okay, let me back up. The thought process was, if I fight someone on the last day of school, I can't get suspended. And then, like, the next year or something like that, they put something in place saying that you could get suspended on the last day of school. And if you got suspended, if you got in trouble on the last day of school, whatever your punishment would be, forwarded into the upcoming school year, right? So kids got smart. They figured out, okay, well, hey, if we fight and we don't fight on school grounds, technically we're not fighting at school. So let's go across the street and squabble, right? So that's what a couple of people did. So the word was going around. This last day of school week, everybody, again, I grew up in Florence, South Carolina. It's hot. We normally got out of school like the end of May, a couple of times the beginning of June, first week of June, but it's hot. And I mean, like, um, I don't mean 80 degrees. I'm talking about it's normally in the 90s. So walking home from school didn't make a lot of sense when you could ride on an air conditioned bus, but hey, we were looking for the fights. And so we knew Rocky and Mandy were going to square off. And so it's interesting because, again, it's the last day of school. So now all of a sudden, because we know that these fights are about to happen, you have an influx of people who didn't ride the bus at all. And everybody's, going, walking, and you just see this big crowd of 20, 30 kids, and everybody goes across the street. Well, now across the street was an abandoned high school, um, an old high school that they converted into like a church or something. Um, and so they get across the street, and there was a big, street or whatever like that. So they cross the street. And so once everybody crossed the street, I mean, like, there was this big circle, and Rocky and Mandy started throwing haymakers at each other, not connecting at all, not connecting at all. And so I think Rocky got one in, and then Mandy hit her with a two-piece, boom, boom, like that. And then they started wrestling. And then, of course, devilish, horny little boys like myself in eighth grade, you know why we're here. We're waiting for the bras to pop. Waiting for the bras to pop. And suddenly, Mandy's bra popped off. And boy, we caught a sight because she was way more developed in the 8th grade than, any of the other girls were. So it was a sight to see. We only caught a glimpse, but we caught enough of a glimpse. And even to this day, I can't tell you who won, but that's just some of the shenanigans we had the last day of school. Fighting. I mean, fights. And be clear, young 12 never got into a fight, on the last day of school. I didn't really have no smoke with anybody like that. But yeah, we were there for the fights, the last day of school. Another staple for the last day of school was it was the it was a time where you said goodbye for the summer. Um, we didn't have cell phones back then, right? So we're talking this is, late 80s. We didn't have cell phones. And if there was a cell phone, none of us could afford a cell phone. That was the bag phone, the brick phone back in those days. That you had in your car, right? So, and there was no social media. And, you might have you probably had your friend's phone number, home phone number, right? But unless your friends lived in your neighborhood, at least again, where I lived in Florence, South Carolina, you weren't going to see your friends. If they didn't live in your neighborhood, you weren't going to see your friends again until school started for the summer. I mean, school started, in the fall. So, it was goodbye. It literally and figuratively was goodbye. And so anybody in your neighborhood who wasn't in your neighborhood, particularly girls, you try to get their phone numbers and stuff like that because you wanted to stay in touch. I remember some girls, I remember at least 3 girls, we exchanged addresses. One girl, she was going out of town. She said she was going to write me a letter. She didn't, but she said, well, she said she was. And then I had I had a girlfriend at the time when I was in 8th grade, and I think she came to Atlanta for the summer, and we actually wrote each other a couple of letters. I do remember that, which is crazy. Um, Sending a letter back then is wild. Because I mean, like, what are you going to talk about? But then that makes sense because if you think about it, if you're my girl and we're used to talking on the phone every day, well, guess what we can't do? If you're in Atlanta, we can't talk on the phone because why? Calling Atlanta to Florence was something that we call long distance. And they weren't going to pay for long distance because let me let you in on a little secret, folks. Long distance cost. And a long distance call from Florence to Atlanta might cost you $10. And we ain't had no money. So you had to write letters. So like I said, it was pretty much goodbye for the summer. Now it wasn't goodbye for those who went to summer school. And what was interesting about summer school, at least for me in my era, I don't know anybody who went to summer school to get ahead. Like if you went to summer school, this is because you failed. And either you failed a class and you had to pass a class to move forward, or maybe you failed a class and your mom put you in that class for the summer. But those cases were rare. Most of the people that I know went to summer school so they could pass. And, the last thing you wanted to do was fail a class and have to repeat a grade. Nobody wanted to repeat a grade because, fair or unfair, you were labeled as dumb. And, I'll be honest, we made fun of kids who failed grades. And so if you got held back a year and, we made fun of you. Like I know, I know a couple of people who really should have graduated with me in the class of 1991 from high school, and they graduated in the class of 1992. And it's funny now. It was funny back then. I mean, it's not funny now, but it was funny back then. But yeah, the kids who you saw during the summertime headed toward a school. If you saw any kids walking to school, any kids in a car, in the morning time or something like that, or late in the afternoon, they were going to summer school. And they were going to summer school probably because they failed. because no one, in my opinion, went to school just to get ahead. That was something that you did, once you got to college because you're trying to graduate on time or you're trying to graduate early or something like that. That didn't happen in middle school, definitely didn't happen in elementary school, and it didn't happen in high school, at least not where I'm from. If you failed, you flunked. And if you failed, you were trying to redeem the failedness. It was also goodbye for your teachers. For the most part, when you think about it, each grade that you move towards, that year that you left that particular last day of school, you never were taught by those teachers again. You may see some of them again, assuming they were at the same school as you or something like that, but you would only see them in passing. It was rare for the lady who taught you fourth grade wasn't going to teach you sixth grade, right? But or the man who taught you second grade wasn't going to be your fifth grade teacher or your second grade teacher. They normally stayed in the grades. They didn't move around. So it was also goodbye for your teachers. And so, it could be sad to some degree, leaving the teachers, particularly if there were teachers that you really liked and teachers that you cared about. I tell anybody, the greatest elementary school teacher, the greatest teacher ever in the history of teachers is Miss Nanny's Harris. She was my fourth grade teacher. Also a friend of the family. Miss Harris is the greatest. I don't care what anybody says. I don't even know if Miss Harris is still teaching now. She's probably retired because Miss Harris got to be she's like the same age as my mom. She's got to be in her 70s, but Miss Harris is the GOAT. And, I was legit sad to leave her class. And honestly, when I look back on it, Mrs. Harris's class was the last time when I was in the fourth grade that I got all A's across the board. I never got all A's again. I'd have A's and B's and stuff like that, but never all A's. So yeah, shout out to Mrs. Harris. So yeah, it was goodbye to your teachers. That is what, the last day of school actually represented as well. Now, once you got to high school, it was a little bit different. I went to Wilson High School in Florence, South Carolina. That's where I graduated from in 1991. The last day of school was a little bit different because you knew that you were going to stay in touch. By this time, you were getting phone numbers and stuff like that. Again, there's still no cell phones. We didn't have beepers or pagers or anything like that. But you stayed in touch. And how did you stay in touch? You knew that you had people's phone numbers. So there were meetups. Sometimes you call your homeboys, call the homegirls. Hey, let's meet up at the skating rink. And my memories of our skating rink in our town was, I remember one night, I think we were eighth grade. I think we were in eighth grade. And the homie Rudy, shout out to Rudy. Rudy, had us go to the skating rink because he was meeting this girl. This girl didn't even live in Florence. She lived in like Darlington, which was the next town over. And the only thing that he told us was that she was going to be there and she was going to have on a red shirt. Right. We get to the skating rink and there's like 30 girls with red shirts on. And I mean, the place is packed. There's nowhere for us to find this girl. And I wanted to choke Woody out, man, because I spent most of the night trying to find this girl with this red shirt on. And they didn't say, hey, let's meet over by the snack bar. Let's meet over by the rental area. She just said, I'll meet you there. I'll have on a red shirt. And I'll be honest, I don't even know if we ever found that girl. At least I stopped looking after a certain period of time. But yeah, last day of school, it drew meetups. And of course, like I said, we had home phones. So, you wanted to make sure you get numbers. Getting phone numbers was a must. Like if you didn't get a phone number, you were in trouble. Because I mean, think about it. After you played Atari and you played outside with your friends, when the nighttime comes, you at least want to be able to talk to somebody. You got to be able to mac something. And then, we arranged like mall trips, like, hey, what you doing Saturday? I'm probably going to go to the mall. What time you going to the mall? I'm going to the mall. I'll be out there with my mom around 5. Okay, now you and the homies, you're trying to get your mom. Because again, by the time we got to high school, we weren't driving. But maybe by my sophomore year, I was driving. And so then it was about meeting up with girls at the mall. That was always the meeting spot. Meeting at the mall, either the mall in my hometown, either the mall, Magnolia Mall, um, Southgate bowling alley, or the skating rink. And if I'm not mistaken, all of them are still there. I think the skating rink is still there. I know the mall is. I think the bowling alley is still there too. Um, yeah, so I mean, good times, good times. And so all those things kind of still correlated to the last day of school. So now by the time I got to college at South Carolina State University, the last day of school is different, right? The last day of school when you're in college, it's just chaotic. And what I mean by that is when you're leading up to your last days on campus, it doesn't matter whether that's your freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior. It's chaotic because you have to study and you have to prepare, but you also have to prepare to pack your stuff up and move out of this dorm or move out of this apartment or move off campus or move somewhere. You got to, wherever you are, you got to leave. Unless you just were like a local and you had a spot on campus or you had a spot off campus and you didn't have to leave or anything like that, or you have family in the area. More often than not, you had to have, you know, the pressure of finals, which was in and of itself enough. And then also moving. And, it sounds simple on the surface, but the reality is you have all of this stuff, excuse me, all of this stuff that you brought to college that particular year, right? And not only that, but what about the stuff that you accumulated throughout the entire school year? If you don't start taking stuff home or taking stuff and putting it in storage or wherever you're going to do, whatever you're going to do with it, uh, that stuff accumulates. And so you don't want to have a situation where, you got a bunch of stuff and you don't have any idea as to how you're going to transport it back. My hometown of Florence uh, it's probably roughly about 90 miles from Orangeburg, where South Carolina State is located. But I do remember my freshman year, the week before we went home, week before school was out, went home, got my aunt's Astro van. She had a Ford Astro van, and I drove the Astro van back to Orangeburg, me and my cousin Eric, and we put all of our stuff. We took some stuff home the week before, and we brought some stuff. Then we took all of our stuff, when we came back for good. But yeah, last day of school, last day of class on a college campus is crazy. And here's the crazy part: the last day comes for different people at different times. So my last day of finals might be on a Tuesday, right? So for all intents and purposes, I could leave Tuesday after I take my last final. But my boy Mo, his last day may be Friday. So he's there until Friday and he's got to stay there. And there was no such thing as taking your final online because there was no such thing as online. Right. So your last day really just depends. And if you, I had this happen to me one semester. If you're on that block of kids who have a final on the last day that the dorms are open, almost literally and figuratively, everybody is gone. And you feel like you're the last person on campus, even though you aren't, because there's still kids on campus, but it's not the same. You go in the caf and it's like 10 people in the caf, and you walk on the Ave and it's nobody on the Ave. And it's like, man, where are you going into the pit? Because we had a pit just like a different world. And you go to the pit and nobody's in the pit. And, it's just like 3 people in the back cooking. It's a different look. So being the last day of school in college is totally different. In conclusion, I wanted to, like I said, talk about this simply because baby girl's last day of school, by the time you hear this episode, is happening. And it was a great year. It was a productive year. It was a year that I think is going to springboard her into even bigger and better things. Because like I say, academically, she had a great year, but she made the tennis team and played varsity tennis and did really well. And she made the JV cheerleading squad, which will be on the cheerleading squad next year in the fall. So that means your boy will be back at those at those football games, with the scrunched up face because I'm watching some terrible football, but I'm out there supporting my baby. And basketball, oh my gosh, because she cheered in middle school, and middle school basketball is probably the funniest and most frustrating thing that you could ever want to watch. Just watching kids come in the gym, just chunking up threes like they're Steph Curry and shooting air balls is crazy. But nonetheless, the last day of school should be approaching probably for all of you, particularly for those of you who still have kids in school. Enjoy it, relish it. And then the thing I will, leave you guys with is, share some of these stories with your children or maybe your cousins or any younger people who are still in school, because everybody's got a last day of school story. I just gave you a few of mine. You should share yours with your people. That's going to do it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast. We drop new episodes every Thursday. Also, don't forget about the Rap Soul Podcast. That's our music podcast where we talk about music and artists from the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s when it comes to rap, soul, hip hop, and R&B. It is the best music podcast that you've never heard, so make sure that you check it out. Also, check out our website. You can find everything on the website. It's the 12kylepodcast.riverside.com, as well as the Rap Soul Podcast.riverside.com. Also, lastly, we have merch. We have merch. Click the link that says merch in the description box, and there you can buy 12 Kyle Podcast t-shirts, hoodies, as well as coffee mugs. We got it for the low. That's going to do it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle Podcast. I am your boy, 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5,000. Cheers.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of the 12 Kyle Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and share this podcast with a friend who needs the 12 Kyle Podcast in their life. Every listen, every download, and every share helps us grow. Thanks for being a part of the 12 Kyle Podcast community. We appreciate your support. We will catch you next time. 5,000.